Hi everybody, this is Carrie Golder from Giddy, and I'm showing you today how I took the Amaryllis block, which is the block of the month for EQ8, and I'm turning it into a quilt. I started by going up to the block library and clicking in Contemporary Pieced Flora and then selecting the Amaryllis block. I'm now going to color the block. It's already colored for me, but I'd like to change it to some fabrics that I really prefer to use, which is actually the Kona Cotton Solids from Robert Kaufman. So I'm going to go into my fabric libraries and see where everything is. And I thought it was in my favorite fabrics, but it's actually not in this file. So I'm going to go back into the EQ8 fabric libraries and go into the Robert Kaufman Kona Cotton Solids. And I'm going to select all of the fabrics and add them all to my sketchbook. This way I have a really great selection of fabrics to choose from. So we're going to close that and we're going to now recolor the block. And I'm using the paintbrush here. And if I wanted, I could use the spray can, which would color all of my selections at once for that same color. Or you can do them one by one using the paintbrush. So here it'll be easier to use the spray can feature, so you just click it once and now they're all done. So now let's go up and add that to our sketchbook so that we can use it for later. And then we're going to click on our quilt work table and we're going to select whatever style we want. And this one I'm just going to play with the on-point layout. And then we'll go to the layout and let's change the border to 1/4 inch, and then we'll start working on the design. So I'm just going to drag and drop these in, and then after I get a few in here, I'll just click rotate to see how that'll look rotated. And I like that, so now let's go back and set some more blocks. So you click on set block and then you drag and drop. So I'm just filling these in here, and we're going to just keep rotating them. Once you've got a few in there, it makes it easier to start rotating them so that you can see the overall pattern that starts coming about. And then you can add in your blocks along the edge just to be sure you've got them all set. So I'm liking how we've got these little stars here in the center from this block. That's a cool little addition. So now I'm just going to finish putting my blocks all around the edges and in the corners. And then once completed, we'll just rotate them all into position. It starts to get a little tricky on the eyes, so sometimes it's easier to do the center ones first along the edge and then do your corners. Sometimes when I feel like I've gotten stuck, I'll just look back to the center of the pattern and continue to rotate there. And I think we've got them all. So now let's go back to our fabric tools and select a color. I really want to get the same exact red to use as my binding trim. So I just use the eyedropper to select that color, and then once you've already clicked on the color you want to select with the eyedropper, it then becomes the color you can use on your paintbrush or spray can. So I like the way that looks, but let's see what else we can do with it. let's go back to, oh, before you make any changes, let's save that to our sketchbook. And now we'll go back to the layout and add a couple more columns. Anytime you make some changes, you want to make sure that you add it to your sketchbook so that you can more easily go back if you decide the change you selected wasn't what you wanted. So now that we've made our quilt bigger, we're just going to add some more blocks in there and continue rotating them to set them properly. This will create a more fuller design, and this is now a symmetrical design. And if you know me, you know that I really like symmetry more than anything else. My husband, on the other hand, different story. Just going to keep dragging and dropping these in. And then we'll rotate them, and then I'll drop in the corners afterwards. I really like the pattern that it's creating with all the squares and then all of the stars. I think it looks pretty cool. It really ends up changing the effect of the original block, which is always really fun. Now let's set in our corners. And then we'll rotate those to finish it off. Now I'm going to save that to my sketchbook, and then we're going to play with it a little bit. So I'm going to show you something you can do that I really love. You click on the fabric tools and then randomize, and you can modify the color any which way. Here I selected brightness, so you can see it just brightens up the colors, but you can also click it to randomize, and then it will just literally start changing all your fabric selections, which is always really fun. It gives you a lot of different options than you may have otherwise selected. So if you find one, just click Save to Sketchbook if you really like it, so that you can go back later and add it. And as you're doing this, you can see when certain colors are highlighted, you get a very different effect, like on this one. So I like the way this looks, where it has a much larger overall picture or design. So it's pretty fun. I really like using some of these different features just to get some different ideas and kind of get myself out of my head in terms of color. And it gives me a lot of different options. But now we're going to work on another quilt design and just keep playing with it until I really decide on a quilt that I love. So here I'm using a custom layout, and I think custom layout can be different for everybody. I really like it, and I found a couple of tricks that have made it easier for me. So I'll show you those as we go along. But change your border to 1/4 of an inch. And I really like to use that border as my binding border. So if you want to add other borders, you can always add more, and we'll do that later. But here we're going to just work on the design, and now I'm going to drag and drop a block. You can drag it anywhere into your quilt and then click adjust. And now, because you want to preserve that aspect ratio while you're resizing it, go ahead and click that box, and then you can adjust it to any size that you want. So I'm going to place it, and you'll notice wherever I place it, it'll tell me my x-axis and my y-axis. When I do that, I can adjust those axis points. So here we're going to set a couple more, and then I'll show you how we can be sure that these are, for the most part, centered. So I'm going to set 2 of them, and you'll see they're bouncing back and forth because I'm changing the x-axis and the y-axis. When you do that, it will set itself correctly. So my very small untrained eyes will not be able to get it exact unless I zoom in 100%. So I really like to use the x-axis as my way of setting them more precisely. So here I've just copied and pasted, and now I'm going to move these two blocks down. And I thought I could flip them down, but I can only flip them down if I have them selected one at a time, so that's okay. I'll just unselect them and then rotate or flip, however you want. So I've rotated those two, and I really love the Amaryllis flowers, and when you see them potted, there's always a little bunch of the flowers up top, but then the stalks on the bottom and your potted plant. So I'm just taking a block, an Amaryllis block, but then I erased it, and it gives me a blank block, so to speak. So I've zoomed in, and now you can see that I'm going to adjust my X and Y axes. And I'm noticing that these larger blocks are not exactly in place. See that little space right up there? So we're going to correct that. You go up and then down, and it ends up bouncing right back into place where you want it. So now, instead of 0.31, it's 0.00. So now you can see my box fits perfectly right next to the others. So here you can see the width said 3.99, and then I just am following the width to make sure that it ends at a normal even number. And I'm going to correct my height. Because I have preserve aspect ratio on while sizing, it's messing things up. So I'm going to delete that and now, or uncheck the box, and then I can fix it properly. So now I have this one empty block, and I'm going to copy and paste that. And again, double check my placement and adjust as needed. And now those are going to represent my two stems. Now I'm going to fill in the background with some other blocks, and those will just represent my background fabrics. So once you have one background block, you can copy and paste to the other side. And you can see here that this side is a little bit off. So I'm going to have to correct that. Just using the block size, position, and rotation. And make sure that you correct the other side. Okay, so now I'll take some of these thinner pieces or blocks and just put them alongside the Amaryllis blocks. Now this can be two pieces so that you can attach them as a top row, a middle row, and a lower row. But whatever works for you, just design your quilt that way. You may also want to consider the size of your quilt and whether or not you'll have to piece that long strip or not. So now that we've got our background set, we can go ahead and fill our background however we want. And I'm just making some little color adjustments to the Amaryllis flower so that the red pops a little bit more. Once that's all set, we will go ahead and select the white and use that as our background. and then I'm going to select a green, and let's use the eyedropper again. So I get the exact same green, and I'll use that as my stems. I think I like the way that looks. So now let's go back to our block tools and adjust our background fabrics. I like the way that looks, but I feel like it needs a pot. So I'm going to change this lower half a little bit more. So that we can include a pot. And this is what I do. I truly start with a block and I just keep going until I find something I love. And the pattern just ends up morphing from one thing to another, to another, to another, until I finally settle on something that I love. So I encourage you to do the same thing. Just play around with one block and try and do something different, step out of the comfort zone and see what you can come up with so that you can really create something different than what you may normally otherwise create. So I'm changing my mind a little here on how I would want to put these pieces together, because this isn't going to be a block, it's the lower half of a quilt. So I'll really be able to piece these larger background pieces together by themselves. So I want to make sure that it makes sense for color as well as ease. So you'll see what I'm doing here in just a second. I'm going to change this piece. I think it could be fun to have just one block here instead of two. Let me just undo this really quick. I'm going to select this one and make it wider. This is one of those pieces right here where you'd be able to use some kind of a fun stripe in this area and make it look like you used a piece of fabric that represented all the different stalks in the plant. So now here's another piece of my pot. And I could make this lower pot piece just one instead of three. Now that I've changed the stalk to one width, I could change this lower piece. But let's color it and see what happens. Yeah, I think let's make this one piece instead of three. So we'll just make that a little bit wider here. Just makes more sense to do it that way. So now we have all four of our blocks on the upper half of the quilt, and now on the lower half, or the lower third I should say, we have the stalks and the pot. Now we're just going to add the same color red as for our binding as we used on the flowers. And let's add another border. But like I said, the outside border I really like to use as my binding representation, and then the inside border is where we want to really add something. And I want to add this border because I really like having the separation from the binding and that pot. So let's play with it and see what colors we get. Too green. But we'll just finish it and take a look. We'll save that, go back. Let's just add white back in there. I think I like that better. Maybe we'll add another border. Let's add another little border in here. Again, we corrected our outside border to the 1/4 inch width. And our inside border, we'll leave them both the same, the 2 inside borders. Let's select this pink and see what that looks like as part of the border. I think it makes it look more like Valentine's Day rather than a Christmas amaryllis plant. But it's still pretty, so we'll save it. And now let's move on, or maybe we'll change a couple of these little colors here to still not sure on the green, but we'll save that anyway. So now let's take a look. So far these are the quilts we've made. Pretty wild. But I'm still not madly in love with this one, so let's start a new quilt. And we've done a custom and we've done an on point. Let's go with the horizontal. But you know what, let's go with the custom set again, and we'll still do something closer to the horizontal. It'll kind of be a combined custom set and horizontal set. So let's try this. So as I was doing that, I was thinking about having the blue background on this quilt. And I wanted to change it because I know there's other amaryllis plant colors. So I just was curious. So we're just going to jump back here for a split second. And we're going to recolor it for a spring version. Because, you know, Valentine's Day got me thinking of spring already. So we'll just add in a little bit of yellow, and we'll change the pot to yellow too. Change the border to yellow, and then we'll change the binding back to that nice dark green. Very Easter looking. So we'll save that. I'll put back the white border first. And then we'll save that to our sketchbook. Kind of looking for a color here, and I'm not sure what's missing. I like it, but I feel like we just need a little more depth on the green. But I don't want to change all of them, so just maybe the stalks. I think that center is too dark. Decisions, decisions. The good thing about using the RGB colors is that you can really find the colors you like. You just got to be careful because it may not match your Kona exactly, which is why I really prefer to use actual fabric swatches in EQ8. All right, let's move on. We've saved this in our sketchbook, and now let's take a look at it. Going back to this one to take out that pink. And maybe lighten up this red a little bit. Okay, we'll save that to the sketchbook. Here's what we've got now. All the different options. All those changes we've made. So now let's go back to creating that new quilt that we were talking about before. We're just going to do the custom set, and we're going to make it square. And we'll go back and take down some of these borders. Our first border, we're going to make that a 1/4 inch for the binding. We can leave the borders in for now, but let's take all these blocks out. Because we changed the width of our quilt, it changed and stretched the blocks. So we're just going to take those out. And then I did that by clicking adjust and deleting. If you erase the blocks, it'll leave an empty block there. So let's go ahead and plug in some new quilt blocks, and we'll adjust the size, preserving our aspect ratio so that it makes it quicker. And let's make it huge. Maybe not this huge. Kind of thinking an offset large block with a lot of other smaller blocks. So before I keep plugging in some more here, let's go back and correct that one color that we changed from the other quilt. I just didn't select the right color or block coloring, so we'll just change that now. Okay, so let's select it and we will adjust the size accordingly, and let's make it fit all the way across the edge. We'll just check our placement, make sure it's on point or accurate, and we're going to plug in some more quilt blocks here along the edge. And you can use the copy and paste keyboard shortcuts, or you can use the copy and paste single select options. I'm going to rotate this one. So I'm going to copy and paste all three of these, and I'm just going to move them down into position. Just going to move them so they're all lining the side and the bottom now. And I just need one more. And then I can put them all in place. This is so much easier than trying to zoom in and eyeball it. I spent a lot of time doing that in the beginning because I didn't know that little trick. So if you learn anything from this video, it's that little trick is a huge time saver. It just snaps it right into place. So now let's rotate these so that they are all facing in the same direction. Because I don't really like that lower corner facing outward. And I actually really like this. Kind of has that flying geese perspective or feeling. So now let's go back and play with the colors a little bit here. I'm going to save this before I move on and change everything back to the Christmassy colors. Let's get the spray can out because it goes much faster. And we'll go back and pick a pink or a white. And let's change our inner border color so we can distinguish that red. Oops, undo that. Distinguish our red from the flower against that border. And let's change our blue background to white backgrounds. And we'll save that, and let's see what else we can do here. Oops, I didn't want to go to that. I want to look at my sketchbook here. So here's where we started, and we got a little crazy with color. We tried to do an all-over large amaryllis flower, and then that. And I like actually where we landed. I hope you enjoyed watching how I create quilts in EQ8, and hope you'll join me next time. This is Carrie Goulder again from Kid Giddy, and thanks so much for tuning in.